finding creators is really the foundation to a successful influencer marketing campaign. The best way to find the best quality influencers is actually...
When you get onto an influencer creator's profile, what's your kind of checklist as you're looking through their content, looking at comments?
So I'll admit that when I started off, I would just focus on number of followers. It didn't take too long to understand that that's actually wrong. One needs to understand that when you're working with influencers, the sole purpose of doing it is because of their authenticity. It's because they're off-brand. You don't want them to look like you. You don't want them to sound like you. For B2B, I think you can't not be doing it. Like, how can it not be in your 2025 marketing plan?
Hey everyone, welcome to the Creator Ops Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Schreiber. The goal of this podcast is to educate you on becoming a great operator in the creator economy. On today's episode, I talk with Sarah Adam, who is the head of Partnerships and Influencer Marketing at Wix. Wix is one of the most popular website builders in the world with more than 8 million sites using their platform. During our conversation, we talk through Sarah's process for finding new creators to work with and how she vets them, key learnings from working with influencer agencies, how Sarah finds the balance between creative freedom and proper messaging when briefing influencers, the importance of reporting campaign results back to brands, and lastly, Sarah shares what she believes the future of B2B influencer marketing looks like. And now for my conversation with the head of Partnerships and Influencer Marketing at Wix, Sarah Adam. Finding creators is obviously a big challenge. What's your process for finding new creators to work with, and how do you typically vet them?
First of all, finding creators is really the foundation to a successful influencer marketing campaign. Like, it's possibly the most important phase because, if you choose the right creators, then you're going to have a better campaign than if you're not investing in that stage and you're not really doing it properly. You're not really looking through their content and kind of making sure that they are suitable. So it could be a complete disaster. So first of all, it's a stage that should be invested in, should not be taken lightly. And although there are many, many, many tools that you can use today, and we use some as well, but still, I find that the best way to find the best quality influencers for your campaign, the most suitable ones, is actually searching organically. And this is particularly relevant if it's the first campaign you're ever doing in your specific niche. So if you're starting from zero and you've never done this before and you don't really know who the influencers are in your niche or which kind of thought leaders you should be considering, especially in B2B. So I remember the very first time I ever sat down and said, okay, let's do this. Let's search for creators. I didn't even know which platform to focus on. So I didn't do it through the platforms. I started on Google and I just wrote, influencers to follow in 2024, and then whatever niche it is that I'm looking for, or creators to follow, or thought leaders to follow. And then I would start to go over results, which are usually kind of blog posts, which feel like such an old thing. But it's actually a very effective way to start, because you're going through. I remember going through these articles and then starting to, every time I'd find someone suitable, I'd put their name down in a Google sheet, and then I would start to see names appearing again and again, kind of cross references. And then I would think, okay, that's a good sign. This is someone important. And then when I kind of started to accumulate some sort of list, like I think you need at least, say, 10 to start with, I would then kind of deep dive in each one of those people's profiles, being very aware as to which platforms they're most active on. And again, trying to see some correlation between the people that I found and the platforms that they're on. And then to see who they're following and who is following them, which is a very good way to find kind of lookalikes. That's what we were doing for over a year. Like, we were doing organic searches. And yes, it's time consuming, but again, it's so valuable, because also if you are working with, I think this is true, especially for B2B, because it is more niche than B2C. And when you're working with influencers that are connected to each other, it's a great way to kind of create buzziness when you're going live with campaigns, because they start to kind of comment on each other's posts. It's just kind of echoing that messaging among that very specific niche or community that you're trying to target. So that's really valuable. I do think that with time, and when you're more and more familiar with the influencers in your niche, then I think using tools can really help kind of put you in front of people that you weren't aware of until then, because sometimes it can become a bit of a rabbit hole and you're kind of seeing the same names again and again in your searches, and you need something to kind of refresh it. The tools I've tried quite a few, and I feel that none of them are perfect. I don't even see what's funny is when I do a search and it's for the typical keywords, and I give the same criteria that we are already working with these people, and I don't even see my influencers in the results. I get other results which are great, which is what I'm looking for, but the fact that I'm not seeing my own shows me that there is no perfect tool out there, but I think it can help.
And when you get onto an influencer creator's profile, walk me through what you're going through in your head. What's your kind of checklist as you're looking through their content, looking at comments?
Yeah. So I'll admit that when I started off, I didn't really know what to look at, and I would just focus on number of followers. And I remember that we had someone on our social team who had previous experience with influencers, and she said 20K followers should be your benchmark. She just threw this at me. And I was like, okay, fine. So at first I would just look, I wouldn't care about anything but follow account. I'd just be like, is it 20K or not? If it's not, forget it. I don't even care. If it is, okay, let's look deeper into the content, see if it's relevant. Is it relevant? Let's see if it's good. Let's see what kind of views they get and all that stuff. But it didn't take too long, a few deals, to understand that that's actually wrong, that the follow account, yes, it's some type of indication, but it shouldn't be taken too seriously. And it's actually the number. What I look at today when I'm going through it is I look first of all at the bio, actually, their profession. What is this influencer? What do they do? Where do they work? What is their title? This is the first thing that I look at. Then I'll look at, naturally I'll look at follow account, because that's usually right next to the bio, which is just a slight sanity check, but not more than that. If it's 5K, I'm going to still look at their content. What's the most interesting thing to me, and what I look for immediately when I'm done with those two pieces, are the views. I'll just look and see, say the past, 5 videos is enough for me. I'll look at the views. So I look for a minimum of 5 figures. So 10K views and more per video. That's my minimum, what we look at least. So I look at that. I look at dates. So, how frequently do they post? Because sometimes, everything, you're ticking all the boxes, and then you see their last post was 2 months ago. So on YouTube, that's okay. On other platforms, it's not okay. So it very much depends, but that's also could be a deal breaker depending on the dates, depending on how long ago it was. So that's usually the process.
And what platforms do you typically prioritize? Is there a ranking for which ones you really like and maybe dislike, or is it just kind of vary depending on the creator and their audience that they've built?
So it's interesting, because when we started off, we were only focusing on 3 platforms, I remember. And then as we close, whenever we close a deal with the influencer, obviously we're going to try and maximize each opportunity. So if it's an influencer that's only on YouTube, fine, then it's going to be a YouTube deal only. If it's an influencer that is on Instagram and TikTok as well, and it's they have a good presence there and their channel is working well, etc., then we'll make sure that we have multiple deliverables, cross-platform deliverables per deal. So it varies, but we have learned with time, which platforms work best for us. Instagram, for example, is for sure our favorite. And then we've learned, like, for example, that when it comes to YouTube, that it's more relevant. The long form is more relevant for, say, if we want to focus on a specific feature, because our goal is to raise awareness to our B2B solutions, which is obviously SaaS. So it's very technical if we're talking about the actual product and how to use it. So I think it depends. A lot of it depends on the campaign, the goal, and of course the influencer and where they are strong.
Yeah. Recently, you talked about going from in-house only mindset to agency embracing mindset and having signed several agency agreements. Will you explain why you decided to start working with agencies and kind of that mindset shift?
Yeah. So when we first started to do influencers, when I first started, so it was at a low scale. It was quite slower pace than what we're doing today. And it was obvious that we need to do this in-house. Like, it wasn't even a question of outsourcing because it was totally doable, let's say. And we weren't even sure of the processes, of benchmarks. So it wasn't even a question because it wasn't such a focus. It was more like, okay, let's see what this thing is. And then when we kind of decided to scale considerably, I remember that we were kind of debating, should we get an agency? Should we do it in-house? And then we decided to do it in-house and to not get an agency because the relationship with the influencers is something that is really important to us. And we were concerned that if we would be working with an agency, then they own the relationship and we wouldn't have that direct contact. And I know that many agencies, when I say this to them, they say, no, but that's not true because, whenever you want to talk to them, you can talk to them and we'll introduce you and we'll get on a call. But it still feels distant for us. And that the relationship is like possibly the reason we work with influencers. Like, it is so important. And I see that there are certain influencers that, and this is what we kind of aspire to, is that, the more we work with them, we're getting closer to them, we have that direct communication with them, and then opportunities come. And I feel that if there was an agency in between that relationship, many things that we were able to do, we wouldn't have done. Because if every time we have to think, well, wait, if we do this, the agency is going to get a cut, or maybe things will be delayed, or maybe our message won't get across so well, especially if it's, I don't know, maybe something that's a bit out of the box or something we've never done before. And we just prefer, it's very important to us. So that was the original kind of reason why we decided to develop things in-house and not work with an agency. Recently, we decided to kind of play around with the idea of working with agencies to kind of answer a question of, can it help us scale? Yes or no? And we're working with a few currently. And to be honest, like, I haven't, it's not very easy for me to answer that question of can it help us scale or not? Because I had no idea because it was the first time I was working with agencies, but I was kind of hoping that it would kind of release me of work and let my team focus on other projects kind of simultaneously and for us to only be involved when we're needed to approve things, and for it to run. I kind of expected it to run with us at the same pace. But reality proved differently because there's both a learning curve, which is totally understandable. It's kind of like a new hire. They need to learn us, the product, types of influencers we work with, although it should be quicker than when we started off from scratch because we already have like so many examples to show. But still, there's that period of like getting to know each other and also kind of developing workflows, how we should work together. And kind of nuances of, wait, why is this specific influencer not suitable? So things that are very clear to us in-house, because it's so natural to us, are suddenly like, you have to explain them from scratch. And that's a challenge because I imagine that we'd be able to hit the ground running quicker. So I learned that it takes a month to get to start properly. And then another thing that I've learned is that, I mean, similar to what I was saying before about having an agency that I feel can run with us. So it's interesting. I mean, I didn't imagine that I'd need to really manage the agency or feel I need to manage the agency, which is a time sucker, which is very, it's not only time consuming, but it's like, it's
Mental energy
something I
too.
think of a lot. Like, oh, why haven't I heard from them? How long does it take to do this? What's going on? Should I follow up? Maybe I shouldn't. Is it time for a new agency? So it's like a lot of dealing with things that I was hoping I wouldn't have to, or wouldn't have to as much.
And for your in-house team, can you give just an idea of how that's structured, how many people you have underneath, and kind of just generally speaking, what their responsibilities are and how you guys have developed that team?
So I have an amazing team, very talented women that I have the pleasure of working with, and there's two of them, and we have one more joining us very soon, which is very exciting. And each one is in charge of a particular target audience. We share, there are very specific KPIs that we all need to hit as a team per month, with the thought, obviously, of scaling all the time. And each one of us, including myself, we take care of the entire workflow. So from A to Z of working with influencers, so from the discovery phase to reach outs to negotiations, agreements, budget approvals, to obviously the back and forth kind of managing the influencer in terms of the content and all the follow-ups that are always needed, unfortunately. and then managing the feedback process of the content with the influencer, and then managing, the calendar, the content calendar. When is it going live? Did it go live? And then, of course, the monitoring, the results.
I want to get to the results and how you guys measure that. But first, let's say that you've got a creator on board, they're ready to go. And now it's that kind of balancing the creative freedom with proper messaging. And that's a really big piece of it. In your experience, what's the best way to strike this balance? Because on one hand, you've got your agenda of what points they need to hit, but you also don't want to be so rigid that the creator feels so much like an ad and that it's not in their natural language.
I think it's very, very important to have the right mindset, which is something we've learned over time, is that one needs to understand that when you're working with influencers, the sole purpose of doing it is because of their authenticity, is because they're off-brand. You don't want them to look like you. You don't want them to sound like you. So it's really important to keep that in mind. So we value creative freedom. It's really important to us. And we try as much as possible in the feedback process to not give comments on style. So we're not going to say, wear this, don't wear that, put that lighting on, do this, do that. We try and, we don't give feedback on that, because, and that kind of takes us back to your original question about the discovery. If I didn't like the influencer's style, then I shouldn't have reached out to him and closed the deal. So that's on me. So hence why that's such an important stage. But, we have to give a brief, because we do want to give them some sort of guidance, but we try to, unless it's like a brief on a specific feature release, and then, okay, we want you to do about the feature release, but we won't tell them what their content angle should be or what exactly we want them to do with the product and demonstrate with that feature. So we try to give them, we give them the first stab at kind of, we tell them, play around with the product, and tell us what you think would most interest your followers. And then we give feedback. So if it's totally off, or if the influencer clearly didn't read the brief, if their outline includes something that was on our don'ts list, then we'll bring that to their attention. But if it does, serve our goals for that campaign, then we'll approve it.
What does that creative brief usually look like as well? Is it a couple pages, one pager?
So we try to keep it as simple as possible. The assumption is that that people don't read things. So it's as short as possible, ideally one page. If we're talking about a campaign that's a bit out of the box and it's a bit complex, then it will be slightly longer, like 2 pages. But we do try to keep it extremely clear. We try to deliberately not use like marketing language, to just say, this is what it is. This is what the goal is. This is the time frame, and keep things really as clear as possible.
As you're searching and working with hundreds of creators and influencers now, you posted something on LinkedIn about telling a creator that their pricing was too low. Will you just explain how that went and if that's something that's relatively common?
So I think the more one works with influencers, it's easy to see that the pricing is just all over the place. It's very difficult to find a pattern. There are benchmarks that we've learned, over time. So we have an idea. We have benchmarks of, it's more like ranges. It's not like just a number, but ranges of costs per asset, per platform. And that's true for our niche. Like it could well be that in other niches, it's totally different. In lifestyle, beauty, I don't know what. I'm sure prices are different, but we do have an idea. So when an influencer shares their pricing with me, if it's, sometimes, let's say in most cases it's within the range, but sometimes it's very much not within the range. And sometimes it's a bit out of the range, and then you're like, okay, that's a great deal. Let's do more. Let's make a bigger deal there. And sometimes it's way too high, and then we would negotiate down if possible. And sometimes it's just like totally off the charts. It's happened a few times, not many. And then I feel a need, me or someone on my team, to say to them, this is FYI, this is very low. So that's happened a few times. But also with the ones that are very expensive, sometimes I don't even, I'll just explain that it's above budget and that's it. Because I don't want, the last thing you want is an influencer that isn't satisfied. You don't want that. So if I can't afford it, that's fine. There's plenty of fish in the sea, plenty of brands that are willing to pay. So it's all good.
Besides the actual payment, what other terms are you usually negotiating? Is there name, image, likeness? Is there paid media rights? Or is it relatively, here's the asset that we want you to create, here's the dollar amount, and that's it?
It's usually flat fee per asset. That's what I'm seeing also, because, when I ask them to share their pricing, it's also in most cases that. Rights is relevant when you want to promote the post, so that varies according to the campaign. But yeah, that's what we're seeing, flat fee per asset.
In the past, Wix has given early access to creators and influencers. Will you explain the good and the bad of doing something like this? Because it is a little bit of a double-edged sword sometimes.
Yes, for sure. It is. And speaking to other, like to kind of my counterparts in other enterprise brands, it's a bit of a sore subject because, so being a SaaS product, so yeah, you want to, there's features being rolled out all the time. And many times there's a need to, or a want to, give early access to users, to influencers. And yeah, there's always that chance that they'll play around with the new feature and encounter bugs and have a bad experience, which is tricky. So it's obviously the risk is higher when it's influencers that have never worked with you before, and this is their first experience. So that's that's not good. If it's influencers that are already familiar with the product and they like the product and they've been working with you for a while, then I think it'll be kind of easier for them to be more understanding about that, which happens. So then we've also learned that it's down to setting expectations. And yeah, I guess like anything, you just need to, there's risk and you just need to decide, like, is it worth it?
Let's shift towards the reporting side. And once the creator influencer has done the asset, they've created it, it's live, it's maybe been out for a week or two. What do you ideally like to see an influencer come back to you and report on? What's most important?
Yeah. So I'll tell you something shocking. Is out of, say, hundreds of influencers, there are maybe a handful or less that actually email us afterwards saying, hey, this went really well, or this didn't go so well. Here are the stats. So it's usually, look, the majority of the content that we do with influencers, the stats are out there. Anyone can view them. So we're not, which is great. I prefer that. So we're not, because to be dependent on the influencer for stats, for example, on LinkedIn, is a big pain. So it depends. There is one influencer that we work with, that we love working with, and he's the only one that sends us a presentation after every campaign. And it's incredible. Like, it includes obviously the stats and like screenshots of comments, or if he got DMs that obviously we're not aware of, and suggestions for next time, which is gold, because it gives us the message that, I'm professional, I'm interested, I want to work with you again. And he's giving suggestions and ideas, and that's what we want. Like, it's incredible. So I wish there would be more of that.
And it's surprising that out of hundreds, that only a handful do that, especially when it comes to a lot of these influencers and creators. They want to have more deals, they want to make more money. That's such a simple way to say, right, here you go. And I think that's where we've talked about it on other episodes, but especially if they don't have a manager, they don't have a right-hand person to be like, hey, you can't just take their money, do it, and then not report back. If you want to have a long-term relationship, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I think more and more creators and influencers are getting aware of it, and they're getting managers and operators, helping them with that step.
Yeah. And you know what? Even if it's not stats, because if it's, I don't know, say an Instagram reel, then I don't need them. I mean, it's nice if they were to send it, but it's not a must at all. I think what's really nice, and we do get that sometimes, is just an email of like, hey, it was great working with you. If there's ever anything else, another campaign that you think could be suitable, I'd love to work with you again. Like, even something, just a one-liner like that is, it leaves a good kind of feeling. And it's something that you would then remember, because every now and again, my team and I, we go over, let's say, partnerships, that we did last month or 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And then we're like, do we want to sign another deal with this one or not? And at the end, like, we know the content performed well. I mean, that we can see the numbers in front of us in the spreadsheet. But what we do is I'll say to my team member, was he or she easy to work with, professional, responsive? That will determine whether or not.
Yeah. As B2B creator and influencer marketing continues to get bigger and bigger, what do you think the future looks like in this space, particularly B2B? It's becoming much more popular, but how do you see it evolving?
So I see it kind of getting bigger and better. I see more and more brands joining in on the fun. Yeah, there are more influencers joining in on the fun, all the time. I think LinkedIn will get bigger and better for B2B. I think it's going to become a situation where you can't not be doing it. Like, how can it not be in your 2025 marketing plan?
Specifically for LinkedIn, how has that evolved? Because I feel like it's picked up more pace, but it is such a different ball game than Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, because so many of us are aware, we're already in the marketing game. We know what to look for when an influencer, we can tell if it's paid or not. What experiments have you run on LinkedIn that have given you positive signals there?
So we've done quite a few campaigns on LinkedIn with influencers. And I think it's difficult to say because you could have a post that feels a bit too much like an ad. Not even because it could be because of certain words that are being used, but it could also be because of, I don't know, the images. I think it's kind of easier to feel that it's an ad on LinkedIn. So that's something to obviously stay away from as much as possible. But I think the more kind of thought leadership posts are more interesting. They're more challenging. Like not all influencers maybe think of that automatically or are open to it. It requires like a bit more kind of planning or thinking. I think the posts that are the most successful on LinkedIn, and this is not just paid, this is just LinkedIn, a post that actually give value. That's what people are looking for. So, to learn new things, how can I improve my day-to-day? And I think that's important for paid posts as well.
Yeah, and especially on LinkedIn, where it is, a lot of people are coming there for learning. They're not as much looking to be entertained. So as things progress, there's going to be more and more people with similar types of roles that you have, head of influencer partnerships, head of creator partnerships. What advice do you have for those who are just starting out in a role like yours?
I think it's important to remember that this isn't rocket science. Anyone can do it. You could do it with a very small budget. Yes, it would be a smaller scale campaign, but it's doable. And I think the best way to learn and the most important thing is just to do it. Like, don't think too much. It's okay that you've never done it before. We all started somewhere. And even if your boss has allocated $5,000 for influencer marketing, that's all you have, you can still do enough to prove to your boss that it's valuable. And I think that's the best. Like, this is an ever evolving industry. There's new players all the time. It's okay to not know what you're doing and to just go out there and try. And I think one of the best ways to, like, especially if you're new, to understand like how you should be working with influencers is to just ask them, like, how do you work with brands today? Give me some examples, show me results from those campaigns, like what works, what resonates. And that's the best way to learn. Like, you don't need to guess, you just need to ask.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Creator Ops Podcast. If you're interested in chatting more about the creator economy, send me a message on LinkedIn or email me at hello@creatoropsmedia.com.